So the topic for tonight, I figured, was apropos, not only because it is a continuation of what we talked about last week, but it's really what we would call it inyana dioma. It is very much the topic of the week. The obvious the obvious reason is because in about 15 minutes it will become Yom HaAtzmaut. We are right now, the Jewish date is Daled ER, and in about 20 minutes or so, when the sun sets, it will become Hey ER, which is the day of Yom HaAtzmaut. So I figured a nice topic would be, or an apropos topic, and trying to keep it a little bit fun and maybe a little slightly controversial, so that to attract, get people, spark their interest. But an apropos topic was, or is, to observe or not to observe, or to celebrate or not to celebrate. That is the question. Because you might say, well, what do you mean? It's kind of simple, like celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut. What's the big deal? We're Jews. We have the state of Israel. It's a great thing. Of course, we should celebrate. But as we're going to see in our discussion tonight, that it's not 100% so simple. There is some debate and even some conflict, if you will, in Jewish law as to how we should look at this very day, how we should look at the holiday of Yom HaAtzmaut. Good evening, Mikhail. How you doing? Good to have you here, buddy. So just oh
Hello.
my gosh, look at that beard. Wow, now I know you keep the camera up. No, just kidding.
Wait until I shave my head.
Someone made a comment in one of my classes yesterday that they didn't understand why I was the only one without a beard. Here I'm supposed to be the rabbi, and everybody else has a beard but me. The simple answer to that is while we are in the middle of Sfiras HaOmer, the Kanti de Omer, and the custom on Sfiras HaOmer is not to take a haircut. There is a custom that when Shabbos falls on, when Rosh Chodesh Iyar, which is this past Friday, falls on Erev Shabbos, that you can take a haircut then. So I did have a nice big gray beard, as those of you who can attest, who were here last week. Yet it's gone. Thank God, because I was able to shave on Friday. Though it's coming back, and will be back before Lag BaOmer. So, anyways, sorry, Mikhail, I didn't tell you that before Friday, so you couldn't shave the beard off. But be it as it may, we're jumping into the topic of Yom HaAtzmaut and trying to understand what it's all about, some of the controversy and fun issues that surround it, and just how we as Jews in 2020 should understand the holiday of Yom HaAtzmaut, of Israel Independence Day. First of all, let's define the days. We have three national Jewish holidays. We have three national Israeli holidays. In other words, on the Israeli calendar, they have a total of all the Jewish holidays. And then in addition to that, there are three national holidays. The first of those national holidays is what came last week. That was Yom HaShoah, or Yom HaShoah V'Gevura is the full name of the holiday. That's Holocaust Remembrance Day, and that came last week. Today, or as we're going out of right now, is Yom HaZikaron, which is Israeli Memorial Day. And then tonight will be Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. Hello, guest who just called in. I don't see your name, so we don't know who you are, but welcome. We're just going to mute you, and then when we get to questions, we'll be sure to unmute everybody so they can ask questions. So be it as it may, those are the three holidays. So like anything Jewish, of course, there's some controversy and debate that really surrounds all these days. I want to touch on first Yom HaShoah, even though it was already last week, and why Yom HaShoah is controversial. It seems like a quite simple day not to be controversial. I mean, it's Holocaust Remembrance Day, for crying out loud. What could be wrong with remembering the Holocaust? But in truth, there are two, controversial, questionable issues that come up with Yom HaShoah, with Holocaust Remembrance Day. The first is the timing. That Yom HaShoah, it's a question as to why it falls out, when it falls out. Many people think it's just to kind of squish all the holidays together, because that's always the Jewish custom. I mean, we squish Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot within 3 weeks, and then Pesach and Shavuos within 7 weeks. So people think, okay, we have modern Jewish holidays, let's squish them together, 3 holidays in 1 week, and because that's how we do things as Jews. But in truth, that has absolutely nothing to do with it. The fact that Yom HaShoah falls a week before Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut was, I don't want to say it was coincidental, but it was That was not the calculation that was taken into effect. So Yom HaShoah as a holiday became instituted in 1952. So it was 4 or 5 years into the state of Israel before it became a holiday. And for those 4 or 5 years, there was a lot of debate as to when the National Holocaust Remembrance Day should be. Now, the chief rabbi at the time, Rabbi Herzog, was an advocate for for the day of Asara B'Teves to be the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Now, why? Well, first of all, what is Asara B'Teves? Asara B'Teves is a fast day that happens just after Hanukkah. It happens in the winter. There's several calamities we mourn on the 10th of Teves, the biggest of which was the day that Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem. There's a number of other, that's when Ezra the scribe died, and a few other tragedies. But traditionally, and in Jewish understanding, the 10th of Teves is always the day that a person mourns if they don't know the yahrzeit of their loved ones. So if you know that someone passed away, but you don't know the day that they passed away, then the Jewish tradition is that you keep the 10th of Teves as the yahrzeit. So the chief rabbi, Rabbi Herzog, felt that along these lines that the 10th of Teves should be the Holocaust Remembrance Day. That should be the Yom HaShoah, if you will, because essentially we're mourning the 6 million. The 6 million do not typically have yahrzeits. We don't know when the 6 million perished. So the Jewish tradition would say do it on the 10th of Teves. So that sort of was the Jewish traditional approach. There's a in my humble opinion, I don't want to call it a problem, but definitely an issue that pops up with the modern day state of Israel. And that is that there's a bravadoism quite often that pops up. I mean, you win, X number of wars, I guess you develop a little bit of bravadoism. We see this very much in the historical rewrite of Masada. That's a perfect example of that. Why do I call it historical? Hey, Brad, how you doing? Why do we call it the historical rewriting? It's because if we look in Jewish tradition, what happened at Masada was not a very positive thing. You had 970 Jews who committed suicide. They were rebelling after the temple was destroyed. The Jewish approach always was, we don't sacrifice our life just for the sake of a rebellion. At that point, it was only for the sake of rebellion. Yet we see that in the modern Jewish psyche in Israel, if you are sworn in as an Israeli soldier, you have a choice as to where your swearing in will be. You could do it either at the Kotel, at the Western Wall, or you could do it at Masada. And the reason for the swearing of Masada, it comes hand in hand with the slogan, if you will, that is said when the soldiers are sworn in at Masada. And the slogan is, Masada od lo tipol, that Masada will not fall again. Now that's really, according to Jewish philosophy and Jewish history, that slogan is problematic because the whole rebellion of Masada was not Jewish. It was a group of zealots who literally committed suicide just for the sake of their zealotry. Not very Jewish. So along with that bravadoism, it was built in with the establishment of Yom HaShoah v'Gevura. And what I mean by that is, first of all, the name. It was not just Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, but it's Yom HaShoah v'Gevura, the day of remembrance and strength. In other words, the day of Holocaust martyrs and heroes. That's how it's often translated, because the first government, the initial government of the state of Israel, did not just want to remember those who had fallen, did not just want to remember those who had perished, but wanted to remember those who stood up and fought. Now, if you read any Holocaust history, there's a number of wonderful ones. I highly recommend Deborah Lipstadt's newest book on Eichmann, wonderful book. The quintessential work on Holocaust education, Holocaust history, is The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Also I say wonderful, really in an academic way, but really must reads as Jews. You can read any of these accounts that there were very few rebellions, but the most famous are really I don't want to say the only one, but the most famous, or the one that had with it even limited success, was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, again, is when those who had yet to be transported from Warsaw towards the end of the war mounted the rebellion against the Nazis. It lasted for, I believe, 3 weeks. So the Knesset decided that they wanted to put Yom HaShoah on the day of the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto, because that showed the strength of the Jewish people. And that was very much they wanted to get, the founders of the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, wanted to get rid of this this image of the weak Jew, of the the Jew who can't fight back. They wanted to be the strong Jew, the bravado Jew. So therefore they made a Yom HaShoah Gevurah. They wanted to remember the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, the one real uprising and the Churban and the destruction of Europe and the Shoah and the Holocaust that we can point to. There was only one problem. What day did the Warsaw Ghetto uprising begin? Anybody know here? We'll unmute everybody for a second. What day did the Warsaw Ghetto uprising begin? Anybody know? Okay, nobody knows. We'll mute everybody again. It was on Erev Pesach. It was on the day before Pesach. So as you know, as a Jew, the day leading up to Pesach is a very, very busy day. A lot of cleaning, cooking, doing the last preparations for the Seder. And it was not a very good day to have a Holocaust Remembrance Day. Even the Knesset realized that. Not to mention it's a happy day. The happiness of Pesach already starts on the eve of Pesach. Already leading up in the half day before Pesach, we're supposed to be happy about the imminent holiday of Passover. So they realized that wasn't going to work. So they said, okay, let's just put it somewhere else in the time period when the uprising happened. So what they did was they took the end of Pesach and Yom HaAtzmaut and Israel Independence Day, which we'll get to in a moment, and they split the difference and they put it right in the middle, and that's why Yom HaShoah was last week. Now that did raise a theological problem, because last week was still within the month of Nisan. And the month of Nisan is regarded as a happy month. It's a month in which we don't say eulogies if somebody passes away, God forbid. We don't say Tachanun. We don't say Kel Malei Rachamim, the mourner's prayer. We don't do any of that in the month of Nisan, because the month of Nisan is considered a very happy month. So with the Knesset in 1952 trying to sort of split the difference between Pesach and Yom HaAtzmaut, they ended up putting the holiday square into the month of Nisan, where it really seemingly did not apply or did not belong. So even though the theme of Yom HaShoah is a universal Jewish theme, very important theme, the placing definitely raised some controversy and has continued to raise some controversy from the time when it was placed. That was sort of the big controversy that's always surrounded Yom HaShoah. A smaller controversy is that in Judaism, we already have a Holocaust Remembrance Day. We already had one. It's called Tisha B'Av. In other words, on Tisha B'Av, we mourn every Jewish tragedy from the destruction of the first temple up until modern times. And the liturgy, the poems, the lamentations that are said on Tisha B'Av actually cover from the destruction of the first temple up through the Holocaust. In fact, there were two lamentations that were written, one by Rav Schwab, one from the Baba Rebbe, that memorialize the 6 million who perished in the Holocaust. And many other calamities are talked about on Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av is always the traditional Holocaust Remembrance Day. So for those two reasons, you'll find in a lot of Jewish circles that while Yom HaShoah is definitely an important day, and to poo-poo such a day is not such a wise thing to do, there is some, not that anyone has excitement around Yom HaShoah, but some lackluster acceptance of the day as the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Because first of all, Tisha B'Av is traditionally the day of Jewish mourning, and second of all, the way that the holiday came about, it was not really placed on the calendar with a lot of Jewish traditional concern or thought. So that's Yom HaShoah. Now we're going to transition into Yom HaAtzmaut, as the title of the class suggested, but I will unmute all for a minute. If anyone has a question, you can Zoom raise your hand, or you can throw it in the chat box there. Just any questions on what we covered so far?
You don't want to hear the response?
Okay, good deal. By the way, feel free to save your questions to the end as well. Okay, so everyone is muted again. Now, on to Yom HaAtzmaut. First of all, what is Yom HaAtzmaut? Why is, it's just about sunset in a few more minutes, so it'll officially be Yom HaAtzmaut. Why is tonight and tomorrow Yom HaAtzmaut? So the simple answer is that was the day, or this was the day, Hey Iyar, the 5th day of the month of Iyar, when the modern day state of Israel was declared as a state. It was a Friday afternoon, about an hour before Shabbos, in what's now called Independence Hall in Tel Aviv. a crowd was brought together, filled the hall, and David Ben-Gurion, who was the head of the Jewish Agency at that point, read the Declaration of Independence, and the new state was declared. Now, what happened next is the question, and what happened next is the War for Independence broke out. The Independence War broke out. Now, that's not 100% true because the War of Independence had already been going on for about a year, or probably even more. In other words, the initial battles of the War of Independence really happened. If we would want to look at the beginning of the war, there's a bunch of different answers we can give. But for sure, from the partition plan, the acceptance of the partition plan from the United Nations 1 year prior to the independence of the state of Israel, already there was a state of war in the country, and that was the atmosphere, so to speak, that the Declaration of Independence came into. So it was interesting that the Declaration of Independence was actually the impetus, if you will, for the beginning of the war. Now, one of the most exciting things that did happen on that day was that Truman, 12 minutes after, Truman was the president of the United States at the time, and 12 minutes after the reading of the Declaration of Independence in Independence Hall, he called Ben-Gurion to officially recognize the state of Israel so that America would officially recognize the state. Now, we take that for granted nowadays, or maybe not so much nowadays, do we take it for granted with the unfortunate anti-Israel sentiment that is rearing its ugly face once again in this country. But at least, until very recent times, we took it for granted that America was allied with Israel, but that was not always so simple. It was definitely not so simple for Truman, and you can see, did I ever give a class on this? Maybe I'll have to give a class on this. But a lot of the miraculous events that even led for Truman to become president. If you remember, the president before Truman was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was elected to a fourth term and only served a few months of that term before he passed away. Now, he knew when he was elected that he was terminally ill. Roosevelt had a vice president by the name of Wallace. Henry Wallace, who was the vice president before. Someone can fact check me if you want to Google that. I think Henry Wallace is the name I remember. That Henry Wallace is the vice president before Truman for the first at least two out of the terms 2 and 3 of Roosevelt. And Wallace was basically a Soviet sympathist, was a communist sympathist. And as much as Roosevelt liked Wallace, he knew that Wallace could not be president of the United States, and he knew that he was going to die in his fourth term. So through a railroading of politics of the Democratic Party, they replaced Wallace for an unknown, for Harry S. Truman at the Democrat National Convention. And this unknown from Missouri, Truman, became the vice president. Now, that was, as Michael Medved points out in his most recent book, that was really a divine stroke of luck for the Jewish people, and really for America as a whole, because had Wallace been in the driver's seat in 1948, he probably would not have been so quick to recognize the state of Israel and a lot of the other things that came about in the Cold War. But be it as may, it was Truman. He recognizes the state of Israel 12 minutes after its declaration. But that was debated back and forth. His Secretary of State said he was going to resign if Truman did that. And it was a hotly debated issue, but be it as it may, Truman did stick by the state of Israel, afterwards declaring that I am Cyrus, that he saw his role as seeming just as Cyrus after the destruction of the first temple, before the building of the second temple, gave the green light for the Jews to go back. That's how Truman saw his role. But it was definitely rocky in the beginning. The close allied relationship that we have today was not there in the beginning. Israel definitely, like every other conflict in the world at that time, became a pawn in the Cold War. The Arab nations aligned themselves with the Soviets, so therefore America had no choice but to align themselves with the Jews, and that's where a lot of the pro-Israel American relationship that we have today came from. But be it as it may, Yom HaAtzmaut, the 5th of Iyar, today was really the beginning of the war. Yet it became the day of Israel independence. So the question is, okay, well, we basically won the war, or at least to quote Rabbi Daniel Gordis, that we've had a number of subsequent wars. Someone put it in there. So thank you, Brad, for the facts. So Vice President was Barkley. What? Here he is. Truman. No, that was Truman's vice president. Who was FDR's vice president before Truman? That was a question. It was Henry Wallace was the name. I'm 99% sure. So anyhow, so we have that Israel declares its independence, and this becomes known as the holiday of independence. So the state becomes a state. What could possibly be the conflict surrounding it? What is the debate? So I'll sum it up like this. It's definitely the National Independence Day of the State of Israel. In other words, it's definitely a secular holiday. And as far as the secular Israeli community concerned, this debate and discussion doesn't even start. There's nothing to talk about because, there's a state, it's the independence, it's the day the independence was declared. That's how states usually celebrate, on the day of independence. But as we know, in most times and places in history, that the day of independence or the Declaration of Independence is always the beginning of a war. And the first question we'll have to ask is whether or not that is a Jewish approach. If that's a Jewish approach to simply mark a holiday on the day of socio-political independence, or if we're looking for something else. That'll be one question we'll have to deal with. Another question we'll deal with is from a Jewish standpoint, again, we're talking a halachic standpoint, a Jewish Torah standpoint, is this a day that should be observed as a Jewish holiday, not an Israeli holiday, but a Jewish holiday or not? So there are basically, I would say, three mainstream approaches to Yom HaAtzmaut in Jewish thought. The first would be, and I'm as all of you who know me know, I hate labels. I can't stand labels. But as long as I give that introduction that I hate labels, I can now use labels because for lack of a better way to help us understand our subject, I'm going to use labels. So in one sense, we have what's called the modern Orthodox camp. That'll be one extreme. The other extreme will be what we call the Satmar Hasidim. That'll be another extreme. And then we will paint as nothing in the Jewish world is monolithic. We'll paint a lot of spectrums of colors in between these two approaches. I want to clarify that as a normative Jewish approach, we're not going to touch on the approach of the Neturei Karta. You've heard of the Neturei Karta. The Neturei Karta, yeah, Henry Wallace, good, I was right. Thanks, Brad. Steve, sorry, Steve got it in there. So we're not going to touch on the approach of the Neturei Karta because the Neturei Karta, in my humble opinion, is beyond the pale of normative Jewish observance. The Neturei Karta are the groups that very much ally themselves with the PLO, with anti-Israel groups, with they're the ones who met with Ahmadinejad Yamach Shemo. They met with Yasser Arafat Yamach Shemo. They met with Ilhan Omar and Rashad Tlaib Yamach Shemo. They meet with all these wonderful quote unquote friends of Israel. That's what the Neturei Karta does. That's that anti-Israel camp. Now, the Neturei Karta is a very, very small group of Jews, maybe numbering 50 families in Mea Shearim, who probably has the best PR department of any group in the world, because when one Neturei Karta whispers something to another one in Shul, it ends up on the front page of the New York Times. Like somehow they're always the one that everybody thinks, oh, that's the Orthodox community, the Neturei Karta. It's a very small, fringe, radical group that, like I said, maybe numbers 50 families, and most of the Orthodox community is very much disenfranchised from and does not associate themselves with in any way, shape, or form. And their approach, in my humble opinion, is beyond the pale of normative Judaism. That being said, the Satmar Hasidim, I would say, are within the pale of normative Judaism into their approach of the state of Israel and therefore Yom HaAtzmaut. So we have to be very careful not to mix up these two groups. Now, the Satmar Hasidim are not pro-state of Israel. That's the group that's usually labeled as being not pro-state of Israel. They do not believe in the idea of a modern state of Israel as we know it. They therefore do not observe Yom HaAtzmaut as a religious holiday. And even their leader, the original Satmar Rav in America, Rav Yoel Teitelbaum, wrote many treatises on why Jews should not look at the modern state of Israel with religious ideal, and why, as an offshoot of that, Yom HaAtzmaut should not be a Jewish holiday. Now, it's very important not to mix up these two groups. I'll explain to you why like this. The Satmar Rav himself once went to visit, this was not Rav Yoel Teitelbaum, it was his son, the subsequent Satmar Rav, who once went to visit the land of Israel, the state of Israel, and somebody asked him, a reporter asked him before his visit, if on his visit he was going to meet with Yasser Arafat. And he responded, why in the world would I ever meet with Yasser Arafat? He kills Jews. as if to say, like what Jew in their right mind would meet with Arabs who kill Jews, with Arab groups who perform terrorist attack on Jews, whether it's Yasser Arafat or Ahmadinejad or whoever it is? Why in the world would I meet with them? Because that's an important distinction between Neturei Karta, who very much aligns themselves with the anti-Israel terrorist groups. And it's important to realize that distinction. Okay, so on one extreme, we're gonna have Satmar that we're gonna discuss and try to explain their position, and on the other extreme, we're gonna have the modern Orthodox community who looks at the modern state of Israel with religious expression, and therefore makes Yom HaAtzmaut not only a national holiday but a religious holiday. Now, you might say, Rabbi, like, this is really an emotionally charged topic. It's a politically charged topic. It's an emotional topic. Why in the world are you discussing such controversial topics? And the answer is because in the world of COVID-19, we had to bring up controversial things because you won't show up to my classes anyways. That's not the real reason. The real reason is because that's the very reason that I think we need to discuss it, because it tends to be in many groups, many communities, a very politically charged and emotionally charged topic. I think that's why it's important to discuss it and try to understand all positions, again, within the framework of normative Judaism. Okay, so let's start with what we'll call the modern Orthodox camp. Again, for lack of better way to put a label, lack of better way to explain what we'll talk about the top label, we'll talk about the modern Orthodox camp. So the modern Orthodox camp puts religious expression to the modern state of Israel. In other words, they look at the modern state of Israel as what's called Reshis Smichas Geuloseno, which means the first fruits of our redemption. What's the big question here? I know that some of you were in our class last week about the Messianic era and understanding Messiah. If not, it's still on YouTube and Facebook. You can go back and look at it. But we talked about the fundamental Jewish concept about how we are all looking forward to a redemption of the Jewish people. And a redemption of the Jewish people is defined, as we said last week, this is the 30-second summary of last week's class. It's defined as undisputed Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel. It's defined as having a king. Now, king does not mean King Bibi. We're not talking about King Bibi here. We're talking about a king from the house of David who is strong in the Torah and the observance of the Torah like David was, who encourages Jews to observe the Torah like David did, who will bring back the exiles of Israel, who are us, those of us living outside of Israel, to the land of Israel. And the final step, as we talked about last week, is he has to build the temple and reinstitute the temple service. That's the Messianic era in a nutshell. Again, see the class from last week if you're interested, but that's what has to happen, so to speak, for us to say this is the redemption. So the modern Orthodox camp, believes in Jewish tradition very much, and they're not going to lie. They're not going to make up things that aren't true. They say, we know Mashiach isn't here. We know the Messiah is not here. We know the temple hasn't been rebuilt. We know that while we have Jewish sovereignty, it's disputed Jewish sovereignty, and we know we're still in a state of war, all of which we said last week have to pass in order for the Messianic era to be here. Yet they say that we're far enough in the process that we can call this Reshis Smichas Geuloseno, that we can call this the beginning of the sprouting of our redemption, and therefore make a holiday out of it, right? Therefore, they look at the existence of the state of Israel with religious significance, and they make Yom HaAtzmaut a religious holiday on par with Hanukkah and Purim. Right? We look at Hanukkah and Purim as rabbinic holidays where they were made after the sealing of the Torah, in the case of Hanukkah, even after the sealing of Tanakh, and they look at it on the same status. And therefore, they look towards Hanukkah specifically as an expression of Jewish thanksgiving for a time when miracles happen to the Jewish people, and they respond like Hanukkah. On Hanukkah, we say Hallel. On Yom HaAtzmaut, we'll say Hallel. And that is very much the approach of the modern Orthodox community. Again, they don't say the redemption has happened because it hasn't happened, because they know the Rambam like I know the Rambam, and there's so much that hasn't happened yet. That being said, they look at Hanukkah as a model that enough has happened, enough miracles have happened, that we can remember those miracles just like we did on Hanukkah. I'll point out one theological problem with that. The main theological problem I have with that is, first of all, that Hanukkah was established in a time period where the Talmud was still open, so to speak. The ability to make rabbinical enactments still existed, and it's really a question if we can even make communal rabbinical enactments anymore like we did at the time of Hanukkah. That's number one. Number two, there's a fundamental difference between Hanukkah and Yom HaAtzmaut. When is Hanukkah observed? Hanukkah is observed on the time when the miracle happened, right? We all know that on the 8 days of Hanukkah, that was after, actually, it was not after the war, by the way. It was not after the war, but it was, again, far enough into the war that Jerusalem had been conquered. The Greeks had at least been pushed out of Jerusalem, at least been pushed off the Temple Mount, and the temple was rededicated. So therefore, what's being observed on Hanukkah is not Jewish sovereignty, because Jewish sovereignty wasn't achieved for another 30 or 40 years. That war with the Greeks went on for almost 40 years. And our full sovereignty wasn't achieved till the end. And in the end, when it's achieved, it's short-lived because the Romans come right in. So in Hanukkah, we're not celebrating Jewish sovereignty, we're celebrating the rededication of the temple. And the Talmud tells us specifically that the rabbis at that time did not establish it as a holiday until they saw the open miracle of the oil. So even though the military victory is very much a part of the establishment of Hanukkah, it wasn't until they saw the open miracle of the oil lasting 8 days that they made it a holiday. And that's why the holiday is centered around the time when the miracle of the oil happened. Not when the Maccabees declared war against the Greeks, not when the battles happened, the significant key battles happened for the Jews to reconquer the Temple Mount. It was when the miracle, the open miracle of the oil happened. That's when the holiday was established. So the second theological problem that just exists with Yom HaAtzmaut is on the day, as we mentioned before, the day of the declaration of the independence of the state of Israel, that was no miracle then. I mean, let's face it, the Arab League made it clear we're going to wipe you off the face of the planet when you declare independence. So the declaring of the independence wasn't the miracle. It was the subsequent 9 months of war before the ceasefire. Again, we're still in a state of war in many of those countries. But until the ceasefire happened, that's where the miracles happen. So maybe we should look at something that happened actually a few days ago. It happened a few days before the Declaration of Independence when Tzfat went into Jewish sovereignty, into Jewish hands, with the whole story of the Davidka. See today in Jewish history from a few days ago for more information on that. Or we pick different key battles where there was real miraculous situation. Maybe those should be the day when we should look at as a day for the establishment of the holiday. Yet there's a sort of a secular socio-political push on, okay, nations have their Independence Day when independence is declared, even though it led to a war. Therefore, that's when the state of Israel wanted to do it, being like a nation like all other nations. Which was, again, that was not how Hanukkah was established. That was for sure not how Purim was established. All the other similar days are always established when the salvation happens, not when retroactively, it was a good thing we declared independence because we were able to fight for our sovereignty. Okay, so that's the, so to speak, the modern Orthodox approach, and those are just a few halachic problems that pop up on that approach. Now let's jump to the other extreme, and then we'll filter back to the middle. The other extreme is, as we mentioned before, the Satmar Hasidim. And again, the Satmar Hasidim are not the only ones who have this approach, but definitely, I would say, the most famous ones with this approach, the most well-known group with this approach. And their approach comes quite specifically from a section of the Talmud. I'm going to be reading here from Masechta Kesuvos, from the Tractate Kesuvos, page 111a, where it says over there that the Jewish people at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple took 3 oaths with the Almighty. They took 3 oaths. There were 3 oaths taken at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. The 3 oaths were that the Jewish people, should not go back to the land of Israel en masse. The second was that they should, the nations of the world should no longer rebel against that Israel should not rebel against the nations of the world, and that the nations of the world should not oppress Israel too much. Again, a 3-part vow was taken, says the Talmud, at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. One is that the Jews would not go back en masse to the land of Israel. In other words, as Rashi explains that, force their way back into the land of Israel. The second was that the Jews should not wage war against the nations of the world. And the third is that the nations of the world, while they sort of had a little bit of a carte blanche to oppress us in exile, the oppression should not be too extreme. By the way, You might say, like Rabbi, did the nations of the world really keep that last part? Did they keep their part of the vow? There's been plenty of examples of extreme oppression of the Jewish people in exile. Yes, but as I often point out, what is the next thing you usually see happen after extreme oppression of the Jewish people in history? That nation's wiped out. I mean, take your pick. Do we have, are the Soviets here today? No, they're gone. Even though, okay, I know that Putin's trying to reestablish them, but they're gone. Is Nazi Germany here anymore? No, they're gone. Are the Cossacks here anymore? No, they're gone. Are the Crusaders here anymore? No, they're gone. Are the Romans here anymore? No, they're gone. Again, every nation that tried to use sort of mass oppression or oppress too much, as the Talmud says, the Jewish people, they're met with demise and destruction, and they're not here anymore. So I think that part of the vow kind of has played true and throughout history in an interesting way. I have a post that I posted a number of times. Maybe I'll post it after this class, where it has a list of all the nations of the world that have tried to wipe out the Jewish people. And one of those great coincidences of Jewish history, every single one of them is gone as a nation. Egypt's gone, Assyria's gone, Rome's gone, the Crusaders are gone, Babylon's gone, Greece is gone, the Crusaders are gone, the Soviets are gone, the Cossacks are gone, the Germans are gone. They're all gone. Now you could say it's a coincidence, but I think not. I think it's part of this vow. Again, but let's focus on the Jewish sides of the vow, because that's what the Satmar Chassidim are focused on. The Jewish side of the vow is that basically until Mashiach comes, again, see last week's class for more explanation on that. Until Mashiach comes, the Jewish people should not return en masse to the land of Israel, and the Jewish people should not wage war to declare their sovereignty, should not wage war against the nations of the world to declare their sovereignty. That is the crux of the issue for the Satmar Chassidim, and there's a number of treatises, as I said, the Revealed Teitelbaum wrote on the subject, to say essentially that there's no reason to believe that that these vows that are talked about in the Talmud don't apply anymore. In other words, the way that the Satmar Chassidim understand it is that the Jewish people took a vow that they will not declare sovereignty. They'll not return to mass the land of Israel and declare sovereignty and fight wars to declare their sovereignty over the land of Israel until Mashiach comes. That is something that's left for the Messianic era. And until that point, so to speak, we take the ol of exile onto our backs and suffer through it, so to speak, because obviously if we're still in exile, there's a reason for it. That's the approach of the Satmar Chassidim. Now, that being said, we're not going to go through it too much in depth, but there's a lot of debate and discussion on that section of the Talmud as to if it applies, doesn't apply. The modern Orthodox camp says right away that is a homiletic section of the Gemara. It's not a halachic section of the Gemara. And homiletics are there to teach us a lesson. They're not to teach us halacha. So they say halachically there's nothing we can learn from that. But even without saying that, there are many great commentators, Chaim Vital, the Maharal, who seem to interpret it as it was limited in time, that the time could have passed, and there's definitely a lot of wiggle room within the discussion of this Talmud to say what the meaning is. That being said, it is a statement of our sages. It is in the Talmud. There are several other statements of the rabbis that are very similar to that. So for us to turn to Satmar and say, you're crazy, you guys are a bunch of religious fanatics, right-wing crazies who don't know what you're talking about. No, they're quite simply basing themselves on the Talmud, basing themselves on a tradition, and therefore we really need, those of us who don't agree with them should really say a statement that we're all too quick to forget nowadays, and that is Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. That if you have an approach that is in the normative frame of Jewish understanding, then that's a fair understanding too. So, and again, that's what I said, what the importance of this class is, that as Jews, we need to understand that if there are approaches that are within the normative approach of Jewish tradition, that are being followed through a Masorah, through a tradition, that we might say, that's not my approach, that's not the approach of my teachers, that's not my tradition, but for us to say, the crazies, that's just not fair. So again, one extreme is the modern Orthodox camp, which says that we put religious expression. We say this is the beginning of the Messianic era. It's the first steps of the Messianic era. Just like Hanukkah was established as a holiday with the singing of Hallel, Yom HaAtzmaut is established as a holiday with the singing of Hallel. And look, just like Hanukkah was just part of a process that really didn't come to fruition. See some of my classes on the problems I have with Hanukkah. But this is also part of the process, and hopefully we will see this time come to fruition. On the flip side, we have Satmar, who says, no, the Talmud says clearly, don't go back and make a Jewish state until the Messianic era is here. And we saw from last week's class what the definition of the Messianic era is. Okay, those are our two extremes. I'll unmute everybody for a second, just if there's any questions on these two extremes, and then I'm going to paint some of the multicolored spectrum of what the Jewish people really look like. So, okay, any questions? You can raise your hand, you can speak out, or you could just put in the chat box there. Any questions thus far? Okay, so I'm either totally losing everybody or we're all good. Okay, I'll mute everybody again, and we'll get back to the unmute a little bit later for more questions. By the way, if at any point when I'm speaking, if you're afraid like me that you'll have a senior moment and forget your question, feel free to put in the chat box, and I'll either get to it in flow or I will get to it when we finish the class. The question I get quite often is, well, Rabbi, what do you do? Like, everyone wants to know what I do. And I say, like, why do you care so much about what I do? What do you do? Like, if you're comfortable with what you do, don't worry about what I do. But be it as it may, I'll explain what I do, because I'm lucky in this sense, because I fall right in the middle. I do what Ben Gurion did. That's my approach. I believe that Ben Gurion is the founder of the state of Israel. Therefore, I observe Yom HaAtzmaut the exact same way that Ben Gurion observed Yom HaAtzmaut. And this is what the Panovich Rav said. Panovich Rav was a great rabbi who was alive at the founding of the state of Israel, lived for several decades into the modern-day state of Israel, and he said, I do what Ben Gurion did. So again, the big halachic questions are, do you say Hallel, these prayers of praise that we say on holidays, and do you say Tachanun, which are liturgical prayers that we take out on happy days? So the Panovich Rav said, I do like Ben Gurion. I don't say Tachanun, I don't say Hallel. In other words, he met in the middle. He said, I don't say Tachanun, I don't say the mournful prayers, but I don't go and say Hallel, because that's what Ben Gurion did. Now, obviously, there's a joke in that statement, because Ben Gurion never said Tachanun, and never said Hallel, and he never prayed. He was not a religious Jew, right? So to say I do like Ben Gurion, it's a little bit of a joke there, because he never did any of this. On Pesach, he didn't say Hallel, and he didn't say Tachanun, and on any other day of the year, he didn't say Tachanun, right? So to say I do like Ben Gurion is a little bit of a joke, but that is, I would say, sort of a middle-of-the-road, mainstream approach in many Jewish groups, is not to say Hallel, but not to say Tachanun. In other words, we're showing that we're in the process. We're very much in the process. But to say that we've gotten far enough in the process to show religious expression, to call it a holiday, that much I don't personally do. Now, you might say, like, Rabbi, what, like, come on, like wake up and smell the coffee. We have, X number of wars have been won, many of them through miraculous means. We have the majority of the world Jewish population living in the state of Israel. And hey, there's even going to be unity government with Netanyahu and Gantz. Like recognize the miracles when you see them, right? Recognize the miracles already. So in a simple sense, I say quite simply, I don't have big enough shoulders. I follow on the footsteps of those who came before me, and I follow in the footsteps of my mentors. And the general approach of the camp that I find myself in is that, okay, we definitely realize we're in the process. We definitely realize we're in miraculous times. But to give religious expression to that far, we're not going to do. Now, what do we refer to this time period as? We refer to as the Ikvasa de Mashiach. So we don't go as far like the modern Orthodox camp to say, okay, we're Reishi Smicha Skulasena, we're already in the first fruits of our redemption. We say we're at Ikvasa de Mashiach, which means the birth pangs of the Messianic era. In other words, just like that moment right before a baby's born is, again, I never went through labor myself. I didn't do it, I did it vicariously with my wife 5 times, but never did it myself, though I have had many kidney stones. And I've heard that's just as bad as labor, so I can imagine what it's like. But be it as it may, there's the concept of birth pangs, to those, hi mom, there's the concept of that pain right before you get the joy of the baby, and sort of the middle of the road says we're in the birth pangs of the Messianic era. That's why we're still fighting wars. That's why we still have UN proclamations and UNESCO and Ilhan Omar and all these wonderful or not so wonderful issues in the world challenging the state of Israel. That's why we have all of it, because we're in the birth pangs of the Messianic era. So as long as we're in the status of birth pangs, it's not really time to say Hallel yet. That being said, it really boils down to a halachic question. That's why I think it's so funny when I get the question, like, Rabbi, do you say Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut? I usually turn back to the person and say, I don't know. Do you say Hallel on Rosh Chodesh? And quite often the person asking the question says, Rosh Chodesh? I don't know. Do we say Hallel? Do we not say Hallel? Do we say it with the bracha? Do we not say it with the bracha? I stump them for a minute. I say, oh, I'm sorry. I thought based on your question that you were very into the laws of Hallel. Because why else are you asking me a question of the laws of Hallel? Because bottom line is that's what it boils down to. Whether or not to say Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut becomes a question, a halachic question of the laws of Hallel. Is this a time when we should say Hallel or we shouldn't say Hallel halachically? Now, if you go back to my class, I believe it's on Torah Anytime, entitled The Magic Number is 5, I addressed a whole other point. I'll give the 30-second version now, and that is that the Pesach Seder, we have a sort of a debate, a philosophical debate as to whether or not the magic number is 4 or the magic number is 5, and it is entwined with the idea as to whether or not we ever went into the land of Israel. Now, of course, we went into the land of Israel. Joshua went into the land of Israel, and after the destruction of the first temple, Zerubbabel, Ezra, Nehemiah went back for the second temple. Now we're back a third time. So, of course, we went into the land of Israel. Yet we don't give religious expression in the Seder to the idea of going into the land of Israel. Again, you can see the class for more depth on that, because we never went into the land of Israel perfectly. We never went to the land of Israel, built the temple, had Mashiach, and had Jewish sovereignty, undisputed Jewish sovereignty with no one challenging it. So since we have yet to get to that state, at the Seder, we don't celebrate the entering of the land of Israel, and therefore we only drink 4 cups of wine, not 5 cups of wine. We only have 4 questions, not 5 questions. Again, you can see that class over there for more understanding. Along those lines, the Taz tells us that very clearly that the day of the 10th of Nisan should not be a holiday. Now you might say, what's the 10th of Nisan? Well, that's the day that Joshua crossed the Jordan River. In other words, the splitting of the Jordan, when the Jews entered the land of Israel for the first Commonwealth, the first 800-year Commonwealth, that was on the 10th of Nisan. We know it from the book of Joshua. We know the date. Yet the Taz and others tell us clearly we're not supposed to make that a holiday. Why? Because while we went into the land of Israel, we didn't complete the going into the land of Israel. Yes, they built the temple. Obviously, there was a first temple and a second temple. But shortly after they split the temple, the kingdom splits into 2. There's civil wars back and forth. So we never have a temple with Jewish unity, with Jewish sovereignty. We never have everything we talked about in last week's class. So says the Taz, the 10th of Nisan is not a holiday. Do not say Hallel on the 10th of Nisan. And we also don't say Hallel on the days when they went back for the second temple. Not only that, but even on even on the holiday of Purim, where Purim really paves the way for the Jews to go back to build the second Commonwealth, and we don't even mention the settling of the second Commonwealth on Purim, as if to say Purim, we're not focusing on the land of Israel, even though that clearly paved the way for the Jews to go back and build the second temple. We don't want it to be confused that on Purim we're celebrating the second Commonwealth. So if they didn't make a holiday for the first Commonwealth, and they didn't make a holiday for the second Commonwealth, where, yes, as far as we've gotten today, we've gotten pretty far. We are living in miraculous times, and none of us should sneeze at it. I mean, hey, in a couple of weeks, Judea and Samaria are going to be part of the state of Israel. If you had told my grandparents, they should, Zozai Gazot for those who are still alive, the rest in peace for those who are not with us, or my great-grandparents, that within a few years of their passing, my great-grandmother passed away, that was in 1986, I think, 1985, my great-grandmother passed away. If you had told her in 1985 that within 35 years, you're going to see the majority of the world Jewish population living in the land of Israel, and Judea and Samaria annexed as part of Israel, she would have told us we're crazy. Yet 35 years later, we see it. So we're definitely living in miraculous times. That being said, if Joshua didn't proclaim a holiday and Ezra didn't proclaim a holiday, again, Joshua in the first Commonwealth, Ezra in the second Commonwealth, how are we already proclaiming holidays now? And that's the big question that I'm always left with is, they didn't do it then, why are we doing it now? So my approach, being a middle-of-the-roader, is to say we're not quite up to Reishi Smichas Gulaseno. We're not quite up to the beginning, the first fruits of the Messianic era, but we're definitely in the Ikfas de Mashiach. We're definitely in the birth pangs of the Messiah. We're definitely living through miraculous times, and we should all appreciate that. Now, tonight and tomorrow, as it is the day when the Declaration of Independence was declared, it should give us pause. We should give thanks to Hashem. We should, for sure, appreciate every step in the process. And if you follow today in Jewish history, there's many other wonderful days when we should stop and give thanks to the Almighty for everything the Jewish people have in the past 72 years of the state of Israel. But be it as it may, at least for where I'm coming from, if Joshua didn't do it and Ezra didn't do it, I'm surely not going to be the one to do it. So that's, but again, like I started with, all three of these are 3 stakes and many different approaches. All 3 of these approaches are rooted in Jewish tradition. Whether it's the modern Orthodox camp that says Hallel, that makes it a holiday, whether it's the Satmar camp that doesn't put any religious significance onto the land of Israel, or the state of Israel, or, you know, guys like me are kind of in the middle who are saying, well, birth pangs of Messiah, we're on the way. If you're rooted in Jewish tradition, yes, we often get emotional. We want everyone to think like us. Yes, we like to fight. You know, 2 Jews, 27 opinions. But let's try and understand that these are all valid opinions. And while they might not be our opinions, they're not opinions that we should get offended by, and they're not causes for fights amongst the Jewish people.